I'm an interviewer, fundamentally, which I think a lot of people think of as a talker and a questioner. But the primary job of an interviewer is to listen. That your next question and your follow-ups are all based on what you're hearing. I think anyone who's curious is a natural interviewer and a natural listener. Listening is it's the fix if you have, an addiction to curiosity. The finest moment in an interview is when someone, perhaps who's told their story many, many times before, says something like, well, I've never thought of it that way. Or what a good question, I just haven't thought about that. Give me a second.
Welcome to Story Doc. I'm Adam Taub. In this episode, I spoke to Ryan Warner, host of Colorado Matters at Colorado Public Radio. We spoke about listening and how to listen as an interviewer. What does it feel like for someone to be deeply listened to?
There's a term I use. It's not a term that I coined, but the word intimacy. So interviewing is intimacy. It's creating instant intimacy. You might have a guest in the studio who's just survived the most horrific experience of their lives. And here you are, just meeting them. And you're asking them to pour their heart out in, what looks like a padded cell here. So, my job is intimacy. It's creating an instant bond with someone so they feel comfortable enough to share. When we do mic checks, for instance, I try not to make it a throwaway question like, what did you have for breakfast? I'll say, what was the most recent concert you went to? Tell me about a show you've been to lately that you enjoyed. What's something in your life you're looking forward to? You can use these moments, mic checks, for instance, to create a bond. And then once someone is comfortable enough to start sharing their story, I think listening is an act of love. That's something that David Isay has said, who is behind StoryCorps, that listening is an act of love. Ask yourself a fundamental question when you go into an interview. Are you asking questions to respond, or are you asking questions to get information? We've all been in the position of listening to someone speak at a party, and midway through whatever they're telling us, we hook onto something that relates to our own experience, and we're so excited to share, I grew up in Peoria too. But that's listening to respond as opposed to listening to learn. So just remind yourself, are you going in to give information, to say more about yourself, or are you going in to glean? There's a lot fighting for my attention in this studio. When I'm live, that clock is ticking. I might have a producer chatting me on the screen. I might be thinking about the fact that my cat threw up that morning. I have my own life that's distracting me. But I have to remind myself, and this has taken years of practice, that despite all the noise, despite all the things vying for my attention, the most important thing is that I hear what the guest says. I mean, how mortifying would it be if a guest says, and that's when I killed my wife, and I say, what's your favorite color? You can help people tell a better version of their own story by being a good listener. When people get back from vacation, for instance, this is just in everyday interactions. You can say, how was your trip? And you'll likely get an interesting reply. But I love I love asking people, what was your favorite meal? What's an experience you'll never forget? What was the worst part of your trip? Good questions that really seek to get something unusual out of someone that make you a better listener and them a better storyteller, So in a way, listening draws out, and the follow-ups that form from listening draw out a better story from the person you're in the room with. Have people engage the senses. When someone is telling you something, I was in Hawaii, ask what it smelled like. What did it taste like? You'll find that you get transported as a listener to where they were as they recount that.
And can you think of someone, a great listener, great conversationalist? Is there someone that kind of stands out?
I got into public radio. My first job in public radio was doing local breaks for Fresh Air with Terry Gross at KOPN in Columbia, Missouri, the community station there. So my job was to come in, babysit the soundboard for an hour during Fresh Air, and in occasional 30-second breaks give the weather and underwriting, which is like advertising. So here I was being paid a small hourly rate to sit and listen to Terry Gross conduct interviews. And I think that in pretty short order, I came to see her as one of the best listeners out there. And someone who expressed genuine surprise. Here's the other thing about listening. If you're truly listening, your reactions to someone will be authentic. And so, people will say, well, Ryan, why do you sound like you're interested in virtually everything that's on your show? And that's a function of, well, certainly curiosity, but it's a function of listening. It's a function of being engaged with the person who's on the show. So, I think Terry Gross taught me that to some extent. Another question I get is how I speak to someone that I might disagree with. People express some shock that, how can you be in the studio with such and such a person? I wouldn't be able to do that. I'd walk out. I'd get so frustrated. And listen, we all walk into any room with our own preconceived notions and our own values, and we may meet people whose values are different than ours. But, curiosity is the antidote to things you disagree with. If you don't understand something, if something revolts you, just get curious about it. It doesn't mean you have to embrace it. It doesn't mean that they become your values. But to some extent, you have a responsibility as a journalist to get more curious about the things you understand less about, or the things you have a strong reaction to. And so let curiosity be your guide. And curiosity, again, isn't satiated without listening. Society is so tribal right now. Politics and positions on issues are identity for people. And I think when that's the case, it's harder to listen to something that you disagree with, because when politics are identity, you're not responding to mere facts or opinions. You're responding to what you think is maybe an assault on your way of living. So I think it goes back to this notion of listening to understand versus listening to respond. And we listen to respond a lot. Social media necessitates that, right? A tweet has a place to reply. A Facebook post has a place to reply. Instagram has places to reply. We're absorbing to respond, as opposed, I think, sometimes simply to learn or to be changed by something. At the same time, we're a fact-based journalism program. So I'm not advising that lies, misinformation, and statements that aren't factual, I'm not saying that those should be listened to in a blanket way and not challenged. Absolutely. Part of listening is for the facts. Is what this person is saying true? Is it based in evidence? That's part of listening as well. So this isn't a free-for-all by any means, but I do think going in to listening, to absorb first, to synthesize what you've heard and then respond is the better technique than listening with an agenda or listening to respond. I'm also a talker as well. I don't want to miscast myself. And there was a part of me that wanted to be an actor, and I became a television and radio presenter. But I think all of that has been driven by curiosity. And so for me, listening is what feeds the curiosity, because if I'm not listening, how am I learning something new or understanding something more deeply? One gift of listening is that you might see something in someone's story that they haven't seen themselves, or maybe you can draw a connection for them that they hadn't drawn themselves. That's the beauty of bringing other people into your story. So I think there's a therapeutic aspect to just talking and being heard. Being heard is very powerful. But the more you bring others into your story, the more there's a chance to relate, to draw connections, to heal, to realize you're not alone. These are all gifts that the listener gives the listened. And that is Colorado Matters for today. Thanks for spending time with us. I'm Ryan Warner. You're with CPR News and KRCC.